So welcome to the 2022 State of Student Recruitment webinar. We are going to be talking through results from an absolutely massive, very exciting, very interesting survey of prospective international students. I have three panelists with me who are going to share their particular perspectives on our data. So we're not just looking at data, we're actually going to think about what this means to us as marketing and recruitment practitioners on the ground, as it were. So I'm hoping that we're going to have some really interesting discussion. There will be a recording of this session available afterwards. There will be a full report available afterwards. And we will also, in June, we'll be looking in more detail at some of the particular segments. The aim today is to be very top level and just talk about what we're seeing kind of overall. And we'll be drilling down into different regions, different modes of study, different levels of study, as of course we should with a data set like this. We'll be doing that subsequently. But, you know, if there's anything that you're particularly interested in, anything you want to talk about, get the panelists' perspectives on, please, by all means, you can ask questions. In terms of Q&A, my colleague Sarah is managing our Q&A, so feel free to use the Zoom Q&A function during the webinar. Pop in questions for our panelists. What I will do as a moderator is I will pick some out at relevant points when I think we can address them, and anything we don't get to, we'll aim to deal with at the end. So without further ado, I can see everyone saying hi in the chat. It's so great to see so many people here from so many different places. I don't have time to read through it all, but it's fantastic. Okay, I am going to zip us on then. So I'm just checking that my screen's working. So yes, welcome. Here's all the details. So that's me over there, a picture taken not far from where I'm sitting right now. As I said, the webinar will be recorded. If you've got any issues, we've got a great team behind the scenes supporting me with this, who will help you and sort things out for you. And as I say, yes, please use the Q&A tab to ask questions. So here is our panel, and I think it makes sense. We'll go in the order on the slide, and I'll ask each of our panelists just to very quickly introduce themselves and say a quick hello. So Brett, can I start with you, please?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Brett DiMarzo. I'm the Director of Graduate Enrollment Digital Strategy at Boston College in Boston, Massachusetts. And I've been in graduate enrollment management for over 20 years now, both in the admissions side and the financial aid side. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Thanks very much, Brett. April, can I go to you next?
Hello, everybody. My name is April German. I am the International Marketing and Admissions Deputy Director for UCAM, Universidad Católica de Murcia. It's based in Murcia, Spain. I have been in the educational field for more than 15 years, working in different sectors or departments of the university, admissions, international student recruitment, marketing, and even student care and student support. So it's a pleasure to have everybody here.
Thanks very much, April. And finally, Christine, would you mind saying a quick hello?
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Christine Todd. I'm Head of UK Recruitment at the University of Liverpool in England. And it's really nice to see you all this afternoon. I've got 24 years experience in the higher education sector. And my role at Liverpool deals with recruitment of both undergraduate and postgraduate taught students. And yeah, looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Thanks very much. So genuinely, a panel that can speak to international education across the globe, really, North America, Europe, and the UK, which is still part of Europe, but its own little bit there. So fantastic to have that range of experience and perspective with us today. What I will do now is I'm going to talk quite quickly through the survey itself. So the survey that we're talking about here, and then I will move into some discussion points and involve the panelists in that. So the first thing I want to say about this is that the scale is absolutely fantastic. So over 20,000 prospective students, data collected in April, and I think a very, very representative range of responses there. The aim for us at Keystone is we are a large group of different, we're hitherto separate companies, but now working together, and we do have the reach to put together this kind of data. And create this kind of insight at scale. And what that means is that even when we drill down here, we are talking about sample sizes of hundreds, which is excellent for this kind of data. Although, as I say, we're staying fairly top level today. In terms of study preferences for people in our survey, so as you can see there, if we look at level of study, I think that's actually pretty representative of international study. You see the biggest chunk is master's level, what we call PGT here in the UK, which we know in most markets is the most internationally mobile level of study, also a fair bit of a graduate there or postgraduate PhD. Looking over at the study mode information or data there, this is interesting, I think. So one of the things that we can do with this data is we can compare year on year, because we've been running these surveys now in various forms for several years, which allows us to look at some of the deltas and the shifts. So in this case, we can see that obviously in 2021, lots of interest in person, a lot of interest in hybrid and online. But actually what we're seeing in 2022 is a swing back to in-person, which makes sense. I think we have these kind of competing hypotheses of the future of international education. You have people saying, well, post-pandemic, everyone will just want to get back to studying in person. Or, well, post-pandemic, now that people can study virtually, they will do. And of course, we know the answer is actually, it depends on the students, it depends on their situation and what they want to do. That's certainly the case that a lot of people do want to study abroad. We've been in a situation where in some places, such as the UK, studying abroad hasn't actually meant studying abroad, it's meant doing so virtually. And I think we're going to see a kind of pent-up demand there. But there's a lot of interest. If you look at the online segment, it's more than doubled, actually, in terms of the percentage point increase. So there's a lot of interest in online too. In terms of destinations for our data set, this is really interesting, I think. So it's fairly Anglophone. We see that there, got Germany edging Australia at the moment, but fairly Anglophone, but actually a lot of interest in Europe as well. And the fact that the UK is ahead of the USA is really interesting. That has not been the case in previous years. I'd be interested to hear what the panelists think when we get to the discussion in a moment, but my hypothesis is that obviously the UK has now relaunched, if you like, a proper post-study work visa. I think that will be a huge factor here. It levels the playing field. So that will be part of what shapes things going forward, but there may be other factors at play. I'd also suggest that the interest in parts of Europe may be a Brexit effect too, because European universities obviously are in a position now to compete for international students and indeed other EU students that may have been put off by Brexit, which is fair enough, I think. So that's the kind of intro. What I'd like to do now is talk, and I'm very much looking forward to getting to the panel discussion, but talk through the first part of our presentation today. So what we'd like to do is look at this as a kind of funnel. So first of all, I want to think about what is it that motivates people to study abroad? How is it that they come to consider certain unis? What attracts them? Then we're going to think a bit about their communication preferences. And then we're going to think about the kind of obstacles they might experience and how we might help them overcome them. So we're starting by looking at motivations for study abroad. So I'm going to quickly go through some data on the slides before we discuss it with the panel. So we can see here that the top three motivations, I think, are about personal development, personal or practical. It's achieving career goals, it's developing as an individual, as a person, and experiencing a new cultural lifestyle. The next three, slightly different. It's about the value, really, of education. So it's about higher quality teaching, potentially, or indeed rankings, and also value in a different sense, the ability to afford teaching. Obviously, tuition can vary substantially. And what we've seen, again, the advantage here is that we can look at this year on year. We've seen a really big increase in students who are motivated by value, and also an increase for rankings. But we haven't picked this out on the slide, but I'd look at point number 9 there. And again, I think a big theme for today's discussion is going to be the focus on flexibility. So university, people who are looking for more study options or different study options, it comes from a much lower base, but it's a very, very big increase there. So that's looking at motivations. We've also asked students what they consider first. So do they think about the country? Do they think, I want to study in America? Or do they think about the school? They think, I want to study at Yale, perhaps. Or do they think, and this obviously, as per the slide, is the answer, do they think about the program that they want to study? And actually, that is the point that most of them start, and it's also growing. So country, as a kind of first factor for consideration, has been declining steadily over the last few years, and program did decline a bit, but now it's picked back up. So we've got a kind of a program first focus, and I think actually that fits with some of what we've seen on the previous slide, motivated by particular study options, by particular, by course content, by practicality as well. And finally, before we move to some discussion, we've looked at the decision-making factors when students are selecting programs. I know I'm moving through the data fairly quickly, folks, but obviously all of this and far, far more actually will be available to you afterwards. I'm just picking out some things that we can potentially discuss today. So here are some big swings we've seen. Looking at 2021 versus 2022, you've seen a big increase in interest in online delivery, but also an increase in interest in delivery on campus. So both actually, it's not that one is necessarily dominating, it's that people, depending on what people want to do, these are much more important factors. And actually, conversely, ranking, quality metrics like rankings and quality of professors at the program level are slightly less important. So my take on this is I think it's really about the study options, the delivery, those practicalities. So that's me having walked through some of our data there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, just so we can see the panelists a little bit better. And I think that's working. So I have a few talking points we could potentially go over here. Christine, if I could start with you, if you don't mind. So we've seen that focus on flexibility, and actually that, you know, there is an increase in interest in online. I was wondering what your experiences have been recently of online versus on-campus interest. You know, is there more interest than usual for online, or what are you kind of seeing on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's really insightful, that, and there's obviously there's a lot in there to kind of unpick. But just looking at some of the headlines, it is a bit of a mixed picture, and we're seeing this right across the board in terms of markets, delivery, you know, different courses, different levels of study. And I think what the pandemic has brought to life is that flexibility and the different options that have been afforded to students that perhaps weren't necessarily always there as an option previously. So it is a bit of a mixed picture, because I think it depends on who you're asking in terms of which countries and which mode of, or which level of study rather, that they're looking at. So we have seen, as your data suggests, an increase in both. So if I look at, as drawing out some examples, you know, historically the largest market in terms of overseas for the UK, certainly at postgraduate level, you know, is from China. Obviously, we saw a huge shift, understandably, to online, and that still remains very much, because obviously there's still areas that are in lockdown. But equally, you know, even if they want to come to the UK to study, you know, they're still encountering quite a lot of barriers. So certainly in China, while study abroad is still counted as essential travel, you know, if they are able to travel, there's still difficulty with a lot of logistics, you know, things like visa application centres being closed. So we see a huge shift in demand for online. And then even within the UK itself, I think because students, and if you're working and doing postgraduate study, you may have relocated, and that gives you more choice, where you don't have to physically be by, you know, the campus in order to go there to study, as you would have to done historically. But then on the flip side, for those students that are in that position and actually they are looking for, you know, staying quite local, or they are indeed able to travel, they're also really keen on us opening up a return to face-to-face teaching. So we are really seeing that that mixed response, depending on, you know, where they're placed, but also the levels of study.
I think, yeah, exactly. As we get more data over the next few years, we'll be able to work out what is it, different audiences wanting different things, kind of tailor the marketing to that.
And I think, as a follow-up, and I think in turn what that puts on universities, that we're obviously, you know, we had to respond to that in terms of the pandemic, and going forward, more importantly, it's continuing to respond and develop what we offer, and using that market insight so that we're essentially, you know, offering that delivery mode in terms of student preferences.
That's it, exactly. It's not just marketing, is it? It's portfolio developments now at the moment. Yes. Brett, were you going to come in on that? I wasn't.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think just to kind of follow up, I think the interesting dynamic that the pandemic kind of presented was, I think that you had this this real division of different experiences that students have had during this time. And I think you're seeing that in some of this data, reflected in some of this data, where I think a lot of students who maybe hadn't experienced online before and had to, because of the pandemic, because of all the changes, we've certainly seen that in the United States. You know, a lot of them have had this experience where, yes, this has been a great experience for me. So I hadn't considered online before, but maybe I will going forward. And then you've sometimes had the opposite reaction where people maybe were not as thrilled with online. And so that's really kind of driven them to look at on campus a little bit more than they had in the past. So I think that's been the interesting, I think, dynamic of what the pandemic has done in terms of how people have looked at the delivery formats of education and finding what works best for them.
I think just thinking ahead to, I don't want to spoil the discussion later, but talking a bit about communications and sort of outbound marketing and so on. I think those positive stories are going to be really interesting, a way to actually tell those stories. Go, look, there's a lot of, certainly here in the UK, there's a lot of often quite negative media coverage of things being delivered online. But again, anecdotally, I can say myself that people actually have found it very flexible, very positive, certain students. And I think, again, I have kind of a post-grad bias or a graduate bias for North America, but I think that's a particular area for that. April, how are things in Europe for this? Are you seeing similar interest in online being sustained? Or?
Actually, yes, it's a similar situation as what Christine and Brett said. I think what pandemic brought to us is a realization. There are two types of students. One student who realized, oh, I wanted to go back to on campus. I realized that I don't want to be at home, and I wanted to be out there. But at the same time, you will also see a group of students who would say, I can actually do it from home. I can just study online. I don't need to move, especially those countries that still have, some issues at the moment when it comes to lockdown, like what Christine said. China right now, we have seen a lot of requests for online programs, and we've never seen that before. So this is also like a good trend for everybody, because we also receive some sort of a request for on-campus programs and asking, hey, do you run this online? So there are new things that we've learned in pandemic, and there are new things that we can strategize and actually do and create out of the pandemic to probably create a certain program from being on campus to online, because we've seen that trend, and at the same time also create other programs that we were running online and put it on campus. So yeah.
Thanks. I was actually going to stay with you, April, for my next question, really. So again, as I was saying, I'm really interested in the fact that there's that focus on programs as the first thing people are considering. I think that's one of the things that might be coming out of this post-pandemic scenario. I'm not suggesting that people aren't biased towards universities, that the university isn't important. Of course it is. But what I think is interesting about focus on programs is it potentially kind of levels the playing field a bit. You don't necessarily need to be, say, an Ivy League school or a Russell Group university or equivalents to get into someone's consideration set, if you like. But what it requires perhaps from marketing is a kind of program first focus. And I don't know if this is something you particularly do, April, or if you've got any experience of it, but how we can market to students in a way that leads with program detail rather than the university.
Okay, well, it's actually difficult to actually just specify on certain programs, especially for big universities and universities that offer a lot of programs. So basically what we are doing from our side is that to see where the interest is coming from, okay, and then work on that strong points that you have as a university. So for example, with us, we are a university of sports. So we focus on sports programs to drive the attention of students. And then later on, you will be able to capture also the interest of those students that are looking for a different program because they are interested on a sort of, interesting ideas or interesting things, football, basketball. And, I wanted to study here, although I don't want to study sports. I just wanted to be involved in sports. That's why I wanted to look at it. So, you will just try to get an opportunity on a specific program that you wanted to get out there. Because like I said, I don't know if Brett and Christine will agree with me, having a long list of programs that you have available in a particular program, it's really difficult to actually choose and make sure that, oh, this program will be an attractive program for us to market or give brand awareness for the university.
Yeah, I think, yes, obviously it's much more challenging, isn't it, to do that across a portfolio, across different levels, rather than just rely on the brand. And as you allude, actually, it's hopefully a bit of a flywheel in that, as you develop the programs, you develop the brand, which kind of helps you, get attention to the programs. I don't know, Brett or Christine, if this is something either of you has much experience with. Christine, I can see.
Yeah, we've been looking at this quite a lot because, you know, again, the motivations resonate with your data around, you know, the programme and in particular the value for money, the employability factor and the careers. So what's kind of come out top for our student motivations is looking at the course in detail, and if they're accredited, that's come out quite high. But also looking at that module detail, which, as April said, it's quite difficult when you've got like a really, really long list of programmes. So what we've been looking at in terms of responding to that, and certainly around a lot of the new programmes that we've recently launched, is kind of like putting them into clusters to respond to different student demands, really. So if they're doing something more on the kind of like experiencing the programme, or if they're doing it with very specific career goals in mind. So we've developed a lot of programs recently to try and respond to the market demand. So, you know, we've seen in the UK a huge demand for staff with specialist data skills. So that's more than tripled over the last 5 years. So we've launched a whole suite of new programs around data science to respond to that and try to really link it to say, you know, this is where there's a shortage in employment, and this is how we can fill that gap. And then the other kind of sort of clusters thinking about, so at Liverpool, as an example, we're very strong on the clinical areas. So it's thinking about conversion courses. So it's taking that motivation in mind in terms of how do I enhance my employability? How do I improve my career destinations? And looking at what students need, either, you know, coming straight out of undergraduate study into postgraduate, or actually for those that are actually already, you know, embarking on their career, working in the industry, those sort of conversion courses, what do they need to develop and enhance their career prospects? So that's what we've been taking on board in terms of our portfolio development based on the motivations that have come through from that student insight.
You said, Christine, that it matches well with our data. It matches so well. It matches my next question. In a way, you've kind of moved us on to there. Actually, I was going to, we saw that one of the big motivations for study abroad was kind of career development, which of course, makes sense, doesn't it? And I'm thinking, yes, if we're thinking about programs, then as you say, like kind of data on employability, professional accreditation, and so on, the kind of things that people might get out of specific programs. I'm just wondering, I guess I'm going to go to Brett actually for this as well. I'm wondering how we do that. Brett, if you've got anything else to say really about how to have a kind of program first approach that also talks about these kind of outcomes, talks about careers and employability, if that's something you're doing much at Boston.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of our teams at the graduate and professional schools, and even at the undergraduate level, I think that we have seen this shift in the way that students are approaching their education and looking at, what is going to be, and I know it's a cliche in higher education, but what is the right fit for me? And I think they're looking at that from a programmatic and a career outcome perspective as well. And so what's really interesting, particularly in the role that I have at Boston College, is really working with the teams within the schools, the graduate and professional schools, to really determine the right tools in which we can talk about that, not only the details of the program, but as you say, some of those career outcomes, to tell those stories of students who are currently in the programs or have graduated from the programs, to really correlate, hey, this is what my experience was studying in this particular area, and here's where it has led me. And what's great is that we have the technology, we have these digital tools available to us to be able to share all of these stories and share all of these outcomes with prospective students. And so whether it's getting the students themselves to talk about their stories through interviews or videos, to even just being able to utilize that in the messaging that our teams are using to connect with students as they're going through, prospective students as they're going through the student journey. Digital tools obviously help us do that. And I think what's nice is that it allows us to be able to do that on a programmatic level a lot easier. Yes, there's still kind of brand things, and yes, we still want to talk about our university and obviously make sure our reputation is put out there so students know that they're getting a quality education, but we have the ability to really focus it on what they want to study, as well as kind of what they're hoping to do in the future as a result of their education, which is great. And we've been really successful at that, used a lot of digital tools to do that. And it's allowed us to be able to really connect with students, both domestically and internationally.
I want to talk about the tools shortly, actually, but when we get there, that's going to be part of part two. So definitely let's hold some of that thought, because I think that is hugely important. It's that challenge that was identified, wasn't it? April made the point, that actually, to some extent we have, when we're doing this program first, it's scaling that. It's difficult to necessarily, to just start doing that. But actually, yeah, when you kind of start looping in the stories and thinking about and the outcomes and so on, but yeah. Definitely part of that. I'm going to move on to our next section in a moment. I'm just going to very quickly, I'm getting loads of questions coming, which is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to try and get through as many as possible. There's one I'm just going to quickly answer, if it's okay, before we move in. Although, okay, happy for panelists to chime in. Dennis has said, I'm a bit confused about the graph showing that students were kind of being quite program first, considering the program first. Dennis makes a very good point, actually, that based on our survey population, this will be very Anglophone. Lots of people will be interested in studying in English. And of course, yes, that will be a factor, won't it? That in a way, that will restrict them to certain countries from the get-go. And I just want to acknowledge that, yes, absolutely. When I'm saying that the data shows that students are being very program first, and that's the first thing they're considering, or the first thing they're saying they're considering, doesn't mean that they're not, kind of pre-selected by country or pre-selected by certain universities. There will be students who will already be intending to study in an Anglophone destination, and perhaps, yes, won't be considering perhaps some parts of Asia as a result of that. But once they're doing that, once they're into that kind of consideration set, they're focusing very, very quickly on the programs, is what I think we're seeing. So I'm going to resume my screen share. Hopefully this will work. And I was almost going to share Brett twice there. Perfect. There we go. So just moving on then. So we've talked about motivations. We've talked about how students go about their decision-making for study abroad. We're going to think now about communication and engagement. So once this process has started, then once they have decided they want to study abroad and they're thinking about different programs and they're starting to talk to universities or program leaders about this, including perhaps many of the people on the call today, how do they do that? So first of all, we see that unsurprisingly, lots of them discover programs online. Now, online can mean lots of things. I think there's probably a fair bit of overlap between general online search and, which you see top there, 54%, and people using university listings platforms, such as the sites we have at Fine University and elsewhere across the Keystone Group, because many of those will be discovered online. One thing I wanted to note, though, online's by far the biggest, but it's still only 54%. All of these other channels add up, and actually, and hopefully we'll talk about this more, these are the ones that are somewhat easier to control. I'm not saying we can't control our discoverability online. My background is partly in SEO. We absolutely can do that and should. But when we're talking about social media, about word of mouth, we've been talking, Brett was just talking about, student stories and so on, and email marketing, which can carry those kind of stories and narratives and experiences, we've got more control there. You might say there's better CRM for that. On this slide also, we're looking at the information students find most helpful. This isn't surprising. Funding is very, very important. So are, university and programs and rankings. But actually, I'd like to home in on the third point there. Again, student stories and study abroad testimonials, almost as important as rankings. So if what we're seeing here to kind of keep a theme running is that focus on particular study options, on flexibility, on the program itself, what we are seeing is that, yes, people want to kind of engage with the students and hear how their study experience has been, which is great, because I think we can do a lot of good work there to help them do that. One of the ways we might let them do that is via social media. So we looked at social media preferences. Now, this is the one place in the presentation really where I have segmented, or where we have segmented the data, because I think it's important. So segmented in two ways here, by level of study and also by age group. I think we could spend a lot of time on this slide. I'm going to try not to, because I want to get to the conversation, but please, we can discuss this and whether this makes sense to the panelists. I think it does broadly. I think, looking at undergraduates or under 21s, it's all about Instagram. I'm not actually on Instagram myself. It's the one I don't really understand, but there we go. But then when you move on into postgraduates and older age groups, LinkedIn leaps right up, doesn't it? Which, again, makes sense. So I think we definitely want to think about the channels we're using for different audiences. One thing I'm very interested in is the fact that TikTok, I'm not on TikTok either, but I thought TikTok was like the new hotness, but it's so low for all of these. Yes, it's higher for undergrads, so it is higher for that kind of stereotypically younger audience, but it's still really low. And I don't know really, is that because students just aren't expecting us to be on that channel? Is there kind of a confirmation bias there? Should we do more? Can we do more? We'll definitely chat about this in a moment, but it's interesting, isn't it, that it is, I think when we do next year's version of this, perhaps it will have grown, but I don't know. Talking about contact preferences, so how do people prefer to be communicated with? Well, it's email. So it's not TikTok, apparently. When you ask them, they want that kind of traditional email contact. We also asked when people expect to reply, because this is really important, with some of these kind of, omni-channel approaches to student communication. Universities are trying to be in lots of places at once, but actually, can we be responsive in all of these places? And when you look at email, which is to say is the majority option here, we find that, it seems like the sweet spot is to kind of get back to them within a week. It seems that the majority will tolerate that. But actually, if you can do it a bit faster, that's good too. I only have 2 slides for this section because I want to get straight back into some discussion of this and see if this matches what we might expect. And April, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you here. So we've looked at the social media data. I mean, does this match does this make sense to you? Is this kind of what you'd expect? And do you use these different channels for different audiences?
Well, I don't use TikTok, that's for sure. I don't even know how to use it. But I do have Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And yes, I definitely agree with it, with the charts, based on the sources of where we get our students from. This is very much accurate. LinkedIn is always reliable for those if you really wanted to go ahead and promote your master's programs or doctoral programs. And then the undergraduate programs, Instagram and Facebook really works well, because I think undergraduate students doesn't really know LinkedIn like I don't know TikTok. So yeah, and I also have the same impression about TikTok. Before it was a big buzz, everybody was saying, oh, you need to do TikTok, you need to have a TikTok, you need to promote your programs, your university in TikTok. But talking to my children, it's not something that can be very useful to promote education because they are there to entertain themselves. It's not like, when you go to Facebook, you also try to look at the news, you also try to look at the video. So it makes more sense to actually, have a high percentage of students looking into those 3 platforms, which is Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, rather than the TikTok.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up a couple of comments that have come in as well, actually, whilst you've been talking there, April. Christine said, social media preferences, surely these vary between countries as well. Absolutely, they do. I mean, we are, I'm very excited about my very big data set here, 20,000 responses. There's a lot of segmentation to do, and we trust we're going to do it. And, if there are things people would particularly like to see, it'd be great to hear about them in the chat and the Q&A, because that can help steer us on that. But yes, I'm sure they will, definitely. But yeah, someone else made a point, actually, kind of passed through on the chat where some really good discussion going on in the chat, actually. It's really great to see people kind of using this as a bit of a forum. Someone was saying, that TikTok, the preferences change so quickly. I guess one of the reasons why I don't get into that, I don't think I could keep up with it, but in terms of the trends and so on. But yes, I think this is one that it would be useful to get everyone's perspective on, really. Brett, you're our resident digital panelist, really, based on job title. I'm assuming that what I'm saying makes sense in terms of preferences. Do you guys, have you ventured into TikTok?
So it's been interesting, number one, I would say I have a 14-year-old boy at home, and my son definitely uses TikTok, but I can't see many of our students utilizing it for the same way. To April's point, I think what's really interesting is that seeing the breadth of responses in terms of all of the different channels, I think it really lends itself to the fact that, all of these different platforms have different ways that they're used by the audiences. And I think if universities are smart, I think there's a place and a time to use all of them. I think you just have to be very careful about how you use them and what you use them for to make sure that you have that it's hitting the goal that you're reaching. So, I know at the undergraduate level, BC, the undergrad admission team utilizes Instagram a lot. They do a lot of work with, photos of campus and photos of our students and during activities, which is great because it's really connecting the prospective student to what life is like on campus and what they would experience if they're a student. Whereas on the flip side, a lot of our graduate and professional schools are utilizing LinkedIn to really connect and talk about and highlight some of the great work that, say, our faculty members are doing. So I think what's really nice is that there really is a place for everything. I do know some of the teams have tried to use TikTok and what they're doing. I think there's been varying success, but I think they've also gone into it with a very realistic expectation of what they want to use it for and what types of things they want to highlight using that channel.
I think that actually ties, Brett, quite closely to someone made a comment. Jennifer was following up on Christine's point at the beginning, about grouping programs by cluster and suggesting that actually maybe we need to think about marketing by faculty, and maybe that shapes some of what we do with social media. Where as you say, some of that will work there. I was going to go to Christine next, actually. We talked about, Christine, if you have anything you'd like to add on social media, please do. But I was going to kind of flip back over to that focus on email as a channel. Again, someone has asked in the Q&A, what other channels so we said email's the most popular, what the other options were. And they were things like live chat and social media. But people I'm fascinated by this because we know people use all these other channels. We know that live chat is just an absolutely standard part of the online ecosystem now. Yet 74% say if they have to choose, they're just going to go with email. And I don't know, Christine, whether you have any thoughts on that, and indeed on the response times. Like, would you aim to be? Is a week roughly what you would aim to do in terms of response there, or would you try and be faster?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that our main means of communication remains email. And I think in terms of those service level agreements, because of the sheer volume that we get, it is about a week turnaround, which, isn't quite perhaps in line with a lot of students' expectations, especially as we're living in this virtual world now and everything's very immediate. So we have put other communication channels in place to respond to that and to be a bit more immediate in terms of our response. So the main communication remains email. That seems to be well received. That seems to be well liked. We do have things like a virtual advisor that's available 24/7. The live chat function, is also very popular as well. If they don't want to wait for a week to receive an email. The other format that we use is we send out quite a lot of text messages. So we've invested in SMS packages as well over the last few years. So we'll follow up a lot of our communications where we're able to, or if there's less of a call to action with a text message. But I am surprised in a way that email still remains the main point of communication. But that's very much the same with us, and just kind of like linking that into sort of like communications and the website and the sort of like the social media debate. I think what certainly the pandemic has brought about in terms of looking at that chart and online being the main format. Obviously we've always had a website, but I think what the pandemic has forced us to do is actually to look at that that website and that online delivery of information, advice and guidance. And I think it's come up in the survey results in terms of students finding the correct information. And I think it has quite rightly forced us to review that and to make sure that we are delivering that content online and kind of like relying less on delivering it in person, mainly for a UK audience. So we have certainly been looking at social media, and I noticed within that, although ranking fairly lower down, but YouTube, so the utilization of YouTube videos to get that sense across to address those student questions around the level of detail that they want, whether it's module detail, but also, as we touched on before, kind of like case studies as well. And it's that sort of like peer-to-peer advice and guidance. You know, how do we get our current students to talk to prospective students? So we've done a lot of that through vlogs and you know, online videos, and we've used YouTube quite a lot in lockdown for that. And that's kind of like good practice that we want to keep up, and looking at other platforms that we use. So if people are familiar with things like UniBuddy, but anything that we can have on our websites or through our social media channels, where it's getting the information across, but also allowing that sort of like peer-to-peer is really important.
It's, yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's, you know, they're going to go for email. There is that kind of confirmation bias, so that's what they're going to look for. And they're going to search online. You know, these are kind of the incumbent ways of doing this. But once they've begun that process, it's odd, isn't it? It's almost as if we, as universities, insofar as I'm not a university, but you know, we are then kind of encouraging them. It's like, great, you've used these old, but look, we can talk to you in all these more modern ways as well, and we can do this. We can share these student stories with you. I was wondering, Christina, because someone's asked actually. You said you've been using texting. You know, do you use WhatsApp as well? I'm guessing so. I'm guessing that's kind of.
I have to say we don't. Maybe we should, but no. In terms of our CRM system, we've got an SMS functionality, but no, we haven't ventured into WhatsApp. And on a similar note, again, going back to the social media, because this is something that we've been looking at, and the results were quite interesting. I was quite surprised that TikTok was so low. Especially as it was preferences rather than what people had experienced, because I do think that it is something that, and I think I've seen a couple of comments pop up about this in the chat, that I think it is a medium that will grow. We are seeing, you know, universities in our sector, you know, delivering more information through TikTok. So maybe it's lower down because as a preference, because as you say, they perhaps don't see us delivering it, or they don't expect us to be on that social media channel. But it is something that we're certainly looking at in terms of we should be responding to how the students want to be communicated with.
I think yeah, TikTok's probably where the student stories perhaps come in. In a way, it's almost about getting the students to do that themselves, maybe. But we need to move on to the next bit just for time and so on. But I did want to, if anyone would like to comment on this, actually, we've had a really good question. You know, we've touched on this, but someone's asking, you know, if we have any data. We don't actually. Well, we do have about chatbots essentially. We have some data in the report on, you know, live chat. We will certainly share that and make that available in the full report. Is that something that any of you have done much with in terms of actually having, you know, kind of programmed chatbot on your website that will kind of take people through? So you type in the course you're interested in, and it knows what info to give you, and you type in your funding, you know, this sort of thing. Has anyone done much of that? Any of you?
It's not something that that we're currently using at BC, but it is something I think that I've investigated a lot at the various schools that I've been in. And I think the advantage it really has, Mark, is being able to give that other outlet for students. You know, we talk a lot in higher education in enrollment management about, you know, really meeting the students where they are. And I think that as a tool, it just provides another opportunity, another outlet for the students to get the information that they need. And similar to other types of functionality with some of these other tools, you know, the automation piece of it allows us to really kind of do things at scale. And from the student's perspective, particularly with chatbots, I think it allows them to, you know, they're looking for that quick answer and that very specific information. And so the technology allows us to be able to do that and provide that to them. And I think that, you know, like all these other channels, you know, that meets the expectation or the goal that a certain percentage of students have when they're kind of interacting with that. So I think that's the beauty of it is hopefully that over time, all of the, you know, universities can look at how they can incorporate all of these tools into providing that just overall quality experience from the student's perspective.
I suppose, April, I can see your Are you?
Yes, no, I just wanted to add, it's the same thing with Brett. We are not using it at the moment, but it's something that we are investigating and we're planning to integrate soon. The reason behind it is because we're using WhatsApp, we're using Facebook Messenger, we have Instagram messages, and we have noticed that students that are communicating with us, even if they did receive an email, they still follow up via the Messenger or via the Instagram, and it's getting we're getting overwhelmed with these messages that we are receiving, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to be able to meet the expectations of the students, because usually those students that are messaging you on these platforms expecting you to respond right away. So yeah, this is something that we're looking at as well and considering.
Yeah, I think the kind of thread I'm hearing here actually is, yeah, it's about being able to scale it, and it's about being able to thread things together. Like, if we give them the also, we don't want to bamboozle them with so many options when they got on a landing page because they've searched online, and it's like email us, live chat with us, WhatsApp us. You've got to, it needs to be kind of sophisticated and so on. But I'm really enjoying. I'm not able to read all of it, but there's some great chat going on about this. I think it's interesting to see the different perspectives. People being very generous, sharing their experiences and so on. Right, I'm going to do my last screen share for our last little section then. So we have talked about motivations, why people want to study, what attracts them, what they're looking for. We've talked about communication, but I think we do have to think about the things that might stop them from studying. And here I don't necessarily mean global pandemics. We're not going to talk about that in specifics now, but some barriers to study abroad in generally. So we've asked this very large audience about their concerns about studying abroad. And what interests me about this, just to get my take on it quickly, over on the left here, the top concerns is this almost goes in order, right? You've got someone thinking about, the practicals. Can I afford it? Can I do it? Is it feasible? Can I actually get there? When I get there, will I have anywhere to live? If I can afford it and I can get there and I can live there, will I actually get any kind of benefit afterwards and so on? So it feels like, it kind of goes in order of concern, but it's that sort of, that pipeline really in order. And actually, when you look at the information people look at seeking, or the things they feel would help them, that first one there, 48%, more information about the whole process of studying abroad. They're looking for something very holistic, aren't they? They're looking really, all of this information on the left, they can get in place A, place B, place C. And if I'm seeing anything in this data, it's the need, and it does actually kind of quite naturally flow back to what we were just talking about in terms of joining things up and using the right channels at the right times. It's the need for just being kind of guided through that journey. And again, I note that they are, almost a third, 27%, or over a quarter, certainly, interested in contacting the uni and contacting students. So again, one of the things that's going to help them do that is that kind of conversation. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I really, really believe this personally. So in my old role, I was head of content at Finer Uni, and I was in charge of all our student content, and we would put so much work into producing this really useful IAG, information, advice and guidance. And generally it was very effective, it worked. But we would also go to events like physical events, and people would queue for a very long time. Sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm not, I don't mean to. They would queue for a very long time just to speak to us, and literally have us tell them the things that were in the booklets on the stalls. But there's no substitute for that kind of confidence in that process of talking to a human being who goes, yeah, it is this, and then it's this, and then it's this. And that's what we need to be perhaps in a position to offer. As part of this, I want to look quickly at our data for a couple of other things that are potential barriers. Funding, obviously, we know that funding is hugely important for international study. It is generally the case for most places around the world that international students will have no or limited access to local government funding. Certainly the way it is in the UK. It does vary, obviously. Some parts of Europe certainly are perhaps more generous than us Brits are in this respect. And I think we do see here that, yes, unsurprisingly, most international students are looking to use scholarships and grants. Now, scholarships and grants can mean a lot of things, but I think really here it's support from universities probably, or from government, things like in the UK, we have Chevening and Commonwealth, and there are different things like Fulbright and so on in the US. I'm a little bit surprised actually that working while studying is so high. I think that's one we need to drill down into. I think that probably depends on market, because in a lot of cases that would be difficult to do depending on visa regulations. But still, that's obviously something that some of them are relying on. And obviously the lots will be, will be interested in or will require a scholarship of some sorts. And then the final slide I want to look at before we go to our last bit of Q&A, or discussion with the panelists rather, we talked about this at the top, that, careers are hugely important. So career prospects are a hugely important motivator for study abroad. So 54% of our audience are prioritizing this as a feature of a program. And actually, one of the ways they want to get that, when we ask them, what is the most important to you in a program for your career goals? So what is it about a program that you think will support your career goals, help you move into a career afterwards? And it's internship opportunities, is by far the biggest here. And again, this is one of those areas where segmentation will probably reveal different things. So for example, to make an obvious point, company visits and industry connections, probably bigger in some fields than in others. If someone doing an MA in philosophy is probably not expecting to spend time in industry, I would say. Nothing against MAs in philosophy either. And actually, that would change when we segment. But if you look at the pie chart on the right here, this one wouldn't. This one would be the same, because we're asking here, are you planning on having an internship during or after your studies? And about half of them say yes. And the ones that don't say yes, the vast majority would like to. So it's the case that so even if you are doing an MA in philosophy versus say an MBA in business or an MSc in engineering or whatever, I'm very post-grad biased there, sorry, they're all looking to access internships. So for the final sort of set of talking points for this, I'll just turn my share off for now. Sorry. I was going to start with you, Brett, for this one, if you don't mind. Scholarships are perhaps one of the oldest marketing tools in the toolkit, really. We know that that's how they work. But, here we are in 2022. What do we do with scholarship? We know everyone needs one, but how can we be innovative here? I'm really putting you on the spot here, sorry, but so what great pearls of wisdom do you have for this?
Sure. Well, yeah, no, I think it's an interesting aspect of it, because I think obviously what we've seen in the US, and I don't think anybody would be surprised at it, is the fact that I think a lot of universities are concerned about the discount rate and utilizing scholarships effectively. This is a personal opinion of mine. I think it really comes down to working with industry to figure out if there's a way to incorporate scholarship funding along with that kind of internship or career opportunity piece, because I feel as though there's an opportunity in which students are obviously looking at that and they're interested in that, and they're also obviously interested in looking for funding. So how can we partner with the different industries, with companies, organizations, nonprofits, all of these different organizations who want to support students and provide those scholarships? How can we partner with them to do both, so to speak? But I think what's really important for universities is to look for those sources of funding, knowing that the students are really this is going to be top of mind for them, particularly when they're looking at studying abroad, and they're going to have to find ways in which to find that funding. And I think partnerships is the most likely candidate in my mind.
Right, I put you on the spot, and I think you've absolutely nailed that. And you've also done it again and kind of preempted my next point, really. Yes, I think that because we know that funding is important, we also know that internships are important. So yeah, putting the two together, I think that's a very, very, very sensible approach, really, because it plays both ways, doesn't it? It helps people access the course and helps increase the value of the course to them, which is good for all sorts of reasons. Christine, can I go to you, thinking a bit more about the career stuff? And again, I welcome any comments from Christine and April on scholarships and so on in general. There are so many different approaches to it, and obviously, particularly internationally, this is perhaps the hardest one to compare across geographies. And if we had more time, then we would think about the way things work in North America versus Europe versus the UK. But Christine, we know that internships are important, that career prospects are important. I don't know, is this something you have any experience of, building internships into programs, or is that something that Liverpool is doing any of?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, because for our students, the main motivation, you know, is career related. I think those industry connections have been absolutely key. So we've been looking at that right across the portfolio, and expanding, you know, certainly at undergraduate level as well, expanding it so that we're offering a year in industry option with all of our programs. But also it's obviously very key at postgraduate level as well. And I agree with Brett in terms of the funding, because we know that not everybody is going to be eligible for a scholarship. So I think it's looking at all the sources of funding, and it's how we package them to make sense of it for students. So looking at external funding, so we've developed like a really good finance and funding search tool on our website. It's more for PGR to begin with in terms of looking at studentships and trying to pull all of that funding together, whether it's university funding or external. But I think it's really key in terms of how we communicate it, because it is obviously such a big area of concern. And I guess that also with the pandemic and students being able to study online, you know, maybe does then question, well, do I need to travel to that country for that experience, and obviously face all of the associated costs with it?
I think that is also important, isn't it? I've again, going back to my kind of background in IAG, I've long thought that, you know, what students really need is someone just to kind of stick it all together and go, look, yeah, you know, it could be this or it could be this. And I'm not meaning to be sort of critical of uni websites sometimes, but it feels like it's well, here's a link, and here's a link, and here's a link, and just that confidence of having it on the page. And okay, well, we can't just pull a scholarship out from under the desk and sort you out, but we can honestly tell you, and it goes back to the student testimonials as well, we can tell you what other students have done. What you are trying to do is not an impossible thing to do. It's just a hard one. People do it every year. And yeah, to bring it together and do that seems like the way to go. And I have just had a computer blip. How's it? Can people still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my computer has frozen. That's fun. But it's good that you can still hear me. Excellent. So we'll not worry too much about that. You can hear me and I can hear you. April, can I go to you for like kind of our final kind of point here? I really, any thoughts on the funding or kind of the career support, but also, as I was saying before, my kind of take on this is that need to be kind of as holistic as possible in understanding the obstacles students face and kind of to some extent hand-holding them through that. And I don't know, you may or may not agree, and I wonder if that's something you have any experience of yourself in terms of what you're doing.
Well, in terms of obstacles, yes, well, I will agree with you definitely that students need a hand-holding. Specifically on different areas of the countries where you are recruiting the students from. So for example, in our case, we are open globally. We handle the international market. So we have students experience, we have experience in the recruitment in the Europe, in Asia, and in the Bennett region, in Africa. So this have, you know, the kind of obstacles that we're facing on those particular regions is totally different. And I wanted to say something about the scholarships as well. I don't know if it's the same case as Brett and Christine, but my understanding and based on experience is that students are actually like almost everybody is looking for a scholarship because it's a validation as well. That's why it's very, very difficult to actually strategize and distribute the kind of funding that you can get. And it's really important to have this partnership, this external partnerships and you know, contacts with other companies in order for them to help the university decide on who to give this particular scholarship to. Because again, at the end of the day, some students can actually afford it, but it's a validation for themselves to actually get this scholarship. So yeah.
Yeah, again, I feel that's so important as well, actually, that it is, you know, it's not just about the money. It's also, yeah, it is in and of itself. It's a broader benefit, isn't it? Certainly, it's something you can put on your CV potentially. So this is great, guys. I am actually staring at a black screen now, but hopefully you can all see and hear me. We are actually more or less at our time anyway. I'm gutted, to be honest, because there was some amazing stuff in the Q&A that I really wanted to try and sneakily spend a bit more time with, and we're not going to be able to the extent that I want to. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to get back together, all of us, I hope, in June. So we are aiming for, and I'm just checking my notes here, we are aiming for a follow-up session on Wednesday, 22nd of June, 3 p.m. British Standard Time. And I'm not going to attempt to translate that because I'll get it wrong, but it's whatever that is in your time. And we're going to do a deep dive into lots and lots of segments. And what I can promise you is that we at Keystone, we will look at all the questions you've asked, and we will make sure that informs what we talk about in June. So if you have asked something, particularly if it's about our data, we'll make sure we get to it, I promise. Okay, you can come and chase me on LinkedIn if we don't. But I'd just like to say, even though I can no longer see them, thanks so much to all of our panelists for your time. And thank you. What's odd is I'm assuming people could still hear me. This is great. And thank you to all of our attendees. So yes, it's a thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark.
So Brett confirms that I'm still connected.
Yes, yeah, we can still.
Thank you, Mark.
Cheers,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks everybody for joining us.